I was training when this happened. Hi guys, I'm Alexandros and today we are going to rebuild the real wheel of my Jitsie Varial. So, long story short, it was about 4 months ago when I noticed that some of the nipple holes on my real wheel had been slightly cracked. However, as you already know, I'm a little bit obsessed with bike maintenance, and so with proper care of my wheel spoke tension and a little bit of luck, I kept this wheel running for quite long. However, I ran out of luck a couple of weeks ago when I had a pretty sloppy drop and my wheel obviously landed with the cracked nipple holes at the opposite side of the landing spot. It feels so good to have this sloppy drop on video. Otherwise, I could brag about an epic drop or gap that damaged my wheel. So, having confessed this, it's about time for me to build the strongest rear wheel possible for my 26-inch Jitsie Varial. After removing the wheel, the first thing that I have to do is to remove the sprocket. And this was the first big challenge that I had to face so as to rebuild the wheel. First, I tried using a cheap chain whip that I had laying around for removing the cassette from my old mountain bike, but it bent right away. Then I improvised and so I made a longer chain whip using a 500 cm carpenter's clamp, but the chain couldn't withstand the forces and failed so many times. Then, given that I was trying to rebuild the wheel on a weekend, I improvised once more and built an 1 meter long lever that had 2 M8 screws to fit the sprocket slots, hoping that this would help me remove it. However, the sprocket was so tightly screwed on the hub that it sliced one of the screws. Actually, I was so impressed by the fact that the steel Jitsie sprocket damaged the M8 screw without having any observable damage. Next, I tried a different technique that was suggested by a Untitled Bike's YouTube video. According to Untitled Bikes, you can unscrew the sprocket by wrapping a piece of chain around it and then grabbing the two chain ends on a vise. You can find the link of the relevant video in the description below. However, the chain failed once more and so I couldn't unscrew the sprocket. After failing so many times, I decided to send a question to Jitsie support and they suggested me this tool, which is actually a very well designed tool that fits exactly the sprocket and so there are no chains or bolts to fail. There is also a video online presenting this tool and you can find the link in the description below. However, having lost a couple of days trying to loosen the sprocket, I didn't want to wait for the tool to get delivered to Greece. So I designed a similar tool and manufactured it by CNC machining a 7075 aluminum billet. The final result was great and actually the sprocket got loose right away. Having the sprocket removed, I disassembled the rest of the wheel. In order to speed up the process of unscrewing the nipples, I modified the flat head screwdriver bit so as to fit a spoke nipple with a spoke in it. Then I mounted the modified bit to my electric screwdriver to unscrew every nipple of the rim. Finally, I cleaned up the hub, the sprocket and the aluminum axle, as these would be the only parts that would be the same for my new wheel. So, having everything disassembled, it's time to start rebuilding the wheel using brand new spokes and nipples and of course a brand new Jitsie rim. But before that I told you that I was about to build the strongest wheel for trials and I wasn't kidding. So, my previous rim failed because the spoke nipple was pulled out of the spoke hole that was cracked due to concentrated stresses at that area. So, what if I use something to spread the stress area even more around the hole? That's actually a good idea. To do that, I got these oval-shaped spoke nipple washers from Sapim. They are quite thin and made out of steel, so they are going to significantly strengthen the spoke hole area while adding just 9.6 grams on my wheel build. But before I actually use them, I have to make them flat to fit the rim profile as they are quite curved. So I used a set of parallel jaw pliers so as to avoid using a vise. Okay, now having prepared everything, it's actually time to start rebuilding the wheel. For the actual lacing of the wheel, I will go for the same strategy that was followed for the factory build, which is a standard 3-cross lacing. This video is not meant to be a wheel building tutorial, so I will speed up the lacing process. In this video I'm going to stress out the main steps I followed to build my wheel and also to share with you some of the tricks and tips I have so as to make stronger wheels. Please let me know if you want me to create a wheel building tutorial and I will try to make one the next time I build a wheel. So let's continue with the actual build. Lacing the wheel, I make sure that I screw each spoke up to the same point, and this is to help us later on with the disking of the wheel, which is going to be almost already dished. Also, I apply anti-seize Teflon grease on every spoke thread so as to reduce the friction that is produced while tensioning the wheel and avoiding in some extent the torsional stresses of the spokes. Having finished with the lacing of the wheel, it's time to start its tensioning. So I mounted my wheel on a drilling stand that I borrowed from Alex Caramano, who is my Athens Trials teammate. However, I noticed that this wheel drilling stand was not very sturdy and thus I didn't enjoy the process of initial tensioning. At that point I tried to tension the spokes as equally as possible. However, my main point at this initial phase is to properly diss my wheel while keeping it true as I tension the spokes. If you diss and true the wheel properly at that point, it will be much easier later on. Note that during this process I do not care about the actual tension value of the spokes, I just go according to my feel, but I try to be quite lower than my desired tension value. After this initial tensioning phase, it's time to deal with the initial seating of the spokes on the hub and the first distressing of the spokes. In order to seat the spokes on the hub, I stepped on them so as to dent the hub flange, and this actually works as the first distressing process of the wheel. This is an idea that I got after watching Ali Clarkson's wheelbuilding tutorial, and I believe that it's going to work very well. Next, I mounted the wheel on my bike and it was time to start the iterative process of tensioning, truing and distressing until I reached the desired tension value while having a wheel that is true and distressed. For this wheel build, I went for 70 to 75 kilograms of final spoke stress for each side, and I'm pretty confident that this will give me the wheel strength I want for my bike. Also, if you want to check out my wheel truing process, you can find the relevant video in the description below. Having a wheel that is well tensioned, true and distressed, it's time to grind its braking surfaces. I went for a light grind as I always ride in dry conditions, and I've noticed that using the Jitsie race pads, I have all the braking power I need. However, the wheel is not ready yet. Now it's time to properly mount the wheel on my bike and do the final tensioning, truing and distressing cycle. If you remember my wheel truing video, I mentioned that I like to true my wheels while they are mounted on my bike. That way I'm sure that I can distress the spokes by riding my bike, and also the rim is stressed due to the tire pressure. So after the final tensioning, truing and distressing cycle of the wheel, I'm pretty confident that I've got the desired result, and so it's time for some quality control so as to ensure that the spoke stress is equal for each side and the wheel is perfectly diss and true. After checking each spoke of the wheel using my calibrated spoke tensiometer and the wheel's roundness using my custom dial indicator, I can proudly say that my bike is again ride ready. Okay, that's it for today, and I would like to learn about your tips, tricks and hacks that allow you to build the strongest wheels possible. If you like this video, smash the like button, and in case that you are new to our channel, subscribe and hit the notifications bell so as to get notified every time I upload a new video. Also, if you think that it was helpful, feel free to share it with your friends. Finally, we can always be in touch by following me on social media. You can find the links to the relevant accounts in the description below. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Until then, make sure that your bikes are well maintained.